So I'm taking an advanced archaeological theory class this semester, and we talk about how humans and the environment are very intricately entangled. And we look at archaeological evidence throughout human history in terms of environmental degradation, and it turns out humans have been doing the exact same thing time and time again. Research in the humanities is really applicable outside of the specific topic that you're working on. So in STEM you might be working on, I don't know, fluid dynamics, so you might be researching stress-bearing properties of metals or whatnot, which is really only applicable in a very small subset area. But when you start to kind of do this research in the humanities about, changing social norms and how it relates to material culture, you can really start to look around you in the world today and think about how influential figures start to shift social norms, and you can really start to think about how that impacts the way that we live our lives in the material world. This summer I went to Zakynthos Greece, which is an island off the west coast of Greece. The conservation of metals itself involved learning about physical and chemical processes of assessing what the material was made out of, and then what the best approach would be to remove the corrosion from the surface of the artifact. The other flip side of the course, the one that I almost found more interesting, was about the process of conservation itself. And that's just mainly about why do we conserve in the first place? And then that kind of informs the second question, which is, when do we conserve? And when do we conserve is a really important question, actually, because much of the time the correct answer is don't conserve, because conservation is actually a fairly destructive process. Through conserving an artifact, you can actually destroy some of the historical value of that object. Which seems kind of counterintuitive, but the act of observing a metal, you have to bombard it with high energy radiation sometimes in order to determine the chemical composition of the material. And that's important because then you can trace where the material itself came from geographically, and you can also trace where it came from in terms of like the human culture that actually created the object itself. The ethical implications are actually fairly large, again, when you're talking about actually destroying the historical value of an object simply to gain data out of it. And that makes you think a lot more, and it made me think a lot more about data itself, and like what do we view as data. When we look at an object, what we find important about it is very different from, say, what the culture that originally made it found important about it. So the understanding that we have of these objects is maybe on a molecular level or a chemical level, but the understandings that the people who actually used the objects had was quite different from the understanding that we have of the objects. So it's really interesting kind of what data are we gleaning from our modern Western scientific perspective? And is that actually useful data in reconstructing the stories of people from the past? Especially if through the collection of that data, we're destroying some of these artifacts.